Have you ever discovered that the moment you give up on something, it starts chasing you? Why do you find it that? At last you let go of someone that you no longer want, suddenly they want you. If you have ever gone through this, stick with me as today we are exploring closely the 9 proofs that they only want you when you no longer want them, all seen through the prism of women's Stoicism. And believe me, one item, especially here, could completely change your perspective on relationships. Before we start, make sure you push that subscribe button and give this video a like first thought, particularly if you're dedicated to learning to regulate your emotions and have a more happy life. You don't want to miss extra content like this. Let me tell you a story that so many of us all too readily know. Let's name Emma. This is the story of a woman. Emma belonged in a loving relationship. She thought she had discovered the one meant to finish her. She spent her time thinking about him, wondering if he felt the same way, constantly checking her phone for a message, planning her days around when they would see one another. She gave him time, her energy, and her emotions, believing he would finally recognize her love and return it, but he did not. He displayed little tremendous excitement. He refrained from chasing as he knew she was always available, always prepared to drop everything for him. He gave her less than first importance. Emma subsequently, she was left empty and wondered why her love lacked enough force. Still, something went off. One day, after months of this emotional roller coaster, Emma decided. She stopped here. She was done thinking as though she was waiting for slights of attention. She turned inside, started rediscovering her own value, and above all started living for herself. 1. The power shift. Has your time, energy, love, all of which you are giving someone ever seemed inadequate? Maybe they called back less than you would have wanted or answered to a basic SMS in days. Still, you started to wait and grab hold of every small action they generated. Announcing frustrating, right? Let me show you right here. Just picture Sarah. She is in an apparently one-way traffic relationship. She basically lives for those few brief times when her partner pays her attention. She is always trying to make things work, trying to meet up, always the one to apologize first after a fight. She keeps on despite tiredness as she believes that with enough work, it will be well worth it in the end. But one day something different happens. Feeling like an afterthought, Sarah chooses, after yet another terrible week, she decides to live free from the shadow of another person. She starts to quit texting initially. She stops to allow her calendar accommodate his last-minute suggestions. She decides to center on herself, her interests, her friends, her hobbies. Her lover first hardly notices at all. Then, though, something amazing happens as Sarah gains increasing confidence in her independence. Her boyfriend is the one phoning more often, attempting to see her, and wondering why she is not as easily accessible anymore. Suddenly, the dynamic shifts when Sarah finds she is not the one aiming for all the targets. The tables have turned around. Today, her husband is the one experiencing loss, which then changed. The Sarah just pulled back her strength. She stopped living her life on the validation of someone else and started to grow more beautiful. Herself started to lose appeal dependent on him. After this mental change, her husband began to recognize he could not treat her with disrespect. The power shift here is that you acquire control when you stop depending on someone else to bring happiness. You stop chasing and begin to be the person of value. And that has a magnetic attraction. People know when you no longer need them. It pushes something within of them. Fear of losing what they did not really cherish before, strictly speaking. The lesson here is that real strength comes from inside. Understanding that your pleasure has nothing to do with someone else causes you to start to become untouchable. Starting to be the one with the power helps everything to turn in your favor. 2. Scarcity creates value. Have you ever given any thought why something seems so much more valuable when it is rare? Think back to the last time you really wanted anything, maybe a limited edition or maybe someone's attention. It becomes suddenly far more important when it is rare. Let us go into the causes of this and the dynamics of relationships. Let us come to know Lily. Lily was always free for the man she liked and for her friends. She dropped her plans to volunteer, texted back immediately away, always showed up whenever someone needed something. She reasoned that her presence and proximity would make people respect her more. The weird thing was, though, they did not. Her pals started treating her as less than, in fact, and the man she thought pleasing, he rarely bothered to hang about with her since. He knew she would be there anytime he decided to call. One day, Lily had an epiphany, spending another lonely night in pursuit of that call that never came. She began to discover she was freely giving too much of herself without any control. She decided boldly and started to say no. Not in an unpleasant way, but rather in a way that honored her own time and effort. She stopped right away from messaging back. She didn't call off her plans to fit someone else's calendar. She set time for herself first, for reading a book, working out, or just sitting about by herself. And what then do you think happened? People began pointing out her sudden absence. Her friends checked in more after not hearing from her. And that man also pulled suddenly into what she was doing. He started texting her more often and asking to hang out. How then is that? Because Lily had brought up a shortage. Her time and attention were priceless, as they were not more easily available. You see, a shortage generates value. This is the same reason limited edition items or rare objects such as diamonds are considered as more expensive. When something is plenty, we typically take it for granted. Still, we want it more when it's limited. People are set up that way. Lily's story gives us a strong teaching about relationships and attraction. Realizing how valuable our time and energy it allows us to understand our own value, and that component of that is Stoicism. Being constantly available suggests that we undervalue ourselves. But when we set some distance, that is, when people work a bit for our benefit, they start to see us differently. We become more valuable in their perspective. Hence, if you have ever felt as though you are being passed over, learn from Lily's book. Value your time beginning right now. Create a little scarcity in your life without feeling bad about it. When you're not always within reach, you could find it shocking how quickly people come to value you more. 3. The illusion of loss. Ever given something's value any thought only after you had lost it? It's like losing your cherished antique snug sweater you have worn for years, or your set of sunglasses. When you had it, you might not have paid much attention. Yet it becomes really precious right away when it vanishes. Relationships go through the same thing. The second someone believes they are losing you, their mental light switch flips. Let me demonstrate this for you here. See Natalie. Natalie had been in a long-term relationship with someone who started to treat her less importantly. Her lover Jake had grown sloppish over time. When they first started dating, Jake would always schedule time for her, go out of his way to surprise her with thoughtful gestures, and give her top importance. But every year the effort faded. Jake assumed Natalie would always be there. Independent of all else, Natalie could sense the shift. She still hoped things would change around even if she no longer felt valuable. She would try to convey her feelings, drop hints, but Jake would discount everything. Why ought he to be worried? She felt to him as nowhere. Still, Natalie once had a flash of clarity. She came to find she had no need to live with second place. She was neither bitter or hostile about it. She just understood that her pleasure counted. She resolved to start noticing the things that made her and her own self happy. She began developing other interests, socializing more, and stopped biding time for Jake's schedule. She was responding for herself, not to get anything. Jake started to suddenly know something. It made Natalie less always ready or waiting for him to provide her top attention. First in a long time, Jake felt the painful sense of loss. He came to find he had been treating Natalie as though her presence would always be constant, independent of his degree of effort. But that scared him, as she may vanish right in front of him immediately. This is the third proof. As people usually only perceive your value when they fear losing you, only when something is disappearing do they begin to grasp its importance. The sense of loss is one quite powerful inducement. It forces people to acknowledge their current reliance. In Natalie's case, Jake started once more calling, planning dates, and showing up in ways he hadn't done in years. But something had changed also for Natalie. She arrived to find she already valued herself. She had no need to wait for someone else to do so. This story shows how occasionally people will not know how much you mean to them until they fear they are about to lose you. The twist is that Stoicism enables us to understand that our value should not depend on the consciousness of another. It should start from within. When you develop that inner strength and self-worth, you create a sturdy platform that is not easily disturbed, even if others are late to acknowledge your worth. For the chase versus the catch. Have you ever noticed how much more fascinating it is to want something than actually have? You get this feeling when you have been fixated on a new phone or fantasy trip. The excitement rises as you think about what it could be like to at last have it. Still, once you act, it might not be as thrilling as you had hoped sometimes. Real thrill comes from the hunt or pursue. Let me introduce to you Clara. Clara felt something for Ben for what seemed like eternity. Ben was the definition of charming. Her pulse would quicken the minute he paid her the least amount of thought. Her days would be spent thinking about him and waiting for those texts or laid-back meetings when he would flirt, just enough to keep her hooked. Clara felt as though she was always chasing him, always trying to have his whole attention, always imagining what it would be like should he at least commit. Still, Ben, he was not pursuing her. Although he valued her curiosity, he was not trying to make her feel as though she was the only one. Clara was already caught, in his opinion. He no longer needed to work for it. Where was the urgency knowing she liked him? And now is when things becomes interesting. Months of this one-sided search ended when Clara decided to stop. She realized her best life was being stopped from being lived by always following someone else, and her energy was running low. She started focusing on herself, going out with friends, picking up new interests, even pursuing other people. She promised her life wouldn't revolve around someone not giving her the same vibrancy, and stopped messaging Ben first. Stopped waiting on his every word. Ben paid little attention at first. Still, over some time he started to feel the shift. Clara was less available generally and less eager to hang out or react immediately. And Ben started to find great fascination. Now he was hunting her. The dynamic had reversed itself. He started calling more regularly, organizing even, acting possessively when he saw her with others. Theo was less available generally, and less eager to hang out or react immediately. And Ben started to find great fascination. Now he was fourth proof, as most people enjoy the chase more than the capture. When something looks out of grasp, it appeals more. It's similar like trying to attain something just out of your grasp. You cannot have it more the more you desire it. The hunt itself is fascinating, though the chase can be exciting. Stoicism reminds us that real fulfillment comes from inside, not from outside acceptance. Clara found that her happiness had nothing to do with Ben following her or not. Living her life for herself satisfied her. What then is the teaching moment? If you've been stuck in a loop of looking for someone lacking the same vitality, it could be time to break off. Give yourself first importance. Let them chase you for once. And even if they do, bear in mind that your perspective on yourself defines the actual value, not in how hard someone else tries to win you over. 5 people want what they can't have. Have you ever noticed people appear to want something much more when it is beyond reach? The things we cannot quickly have, that perfect career, a nice trip, even someone's attention, have a magnetic attraction. It's a typical example of desiring something we can't have. And in relationships, it's really crucial, starting with Jenna. Let me say Jenna was always the one in her relationships that would go above and above to make sure things went according. She was compassionate and giving with her time. She was always accessible. She made it known by texts, calls, and polite behavior anytime she liked someone. Still, she repeatedly observed a pattern. The other person seemed to respond less the more she indicated interest. Her openness appears to turn many people off. Jenna decided one day to try still another approach. She had been seeing Ryan, who had started to withdraw somewhat unofficially. Instead of chasing him, Jenna decided to back off. She stopped being so constantly available, not cut him off totally. She started spending her time doing things she enjoyed, like hanging out with friends, going to a yoga class, and stressing her career not responding right away. To his messages, Ryan first seemed not to care, but transformation happens over time. Jenna seemed less approachable than she had been, he thought. He was the one now planning activities, texting more and worrying what she was doing. Ryan wanted Jenna more, the more obviously out of his reach. She seemed to be the 5th proof comes from people's need for what they cannot have. One becomes in demand when something or someone seems uncommon. That is what human nature is. Anything appears worth more the harder it is to obtain. Think about this. If you have ever found yourself in a situation whereby someone personal or via an opportunity always seemed to be at reach, you may have taken it for given. But its importance in your perspective shot as soon as that object became less plentiful. It's like when you find out about a concert selling out. Those tickets seem to be the most sought-after item right away. Based on Jenna's experience, occasionally you could be more appealing if you back off and create a little separation. Here, though, Stoicism is more about not playing games or manipulating others. It's about discovering your own worth and bucking simple offers of everything. Jenna did not pull back to make Ryan pursue her, as she knew she deserved someone who valued her without her having to overreach herself. The lesson here is strong. You should not always make yourself difficult to get even. If others may often want for what seems just out of grasp, real magic happens when you give your own well-being first priority. Others start to value you when you stop so readily lending so much of yourself. Confidence is magnetic. People that exude confidence usually attract people organically. Have you ever noticed? They seem to have an invisible magnet attracting people in. Even if they're not precisely the most intelligent or gorgeous person in the room. Not conceit. True self-assurance has an overwhelming power. Hello. Emma was often second-guessed what people thought of her. She was naturally shy and insecure in social events and not the most outgoing person. She was seeing Matt, and first everything seemed perfect. But Emma's worries started to show themselves slowly over time. She checked every little remark Matt made, concerned about whether he still loved her, and was always looking for his consolation. She would probe such questions as, "Do you still love me?" Or, "Are you sure you want to be with me?" Matt first understood, but with time her constant need for acceptance began to wear on him. As he started to withdraw and spend less time with her, She could see the distance opening. She seemed to get less of his approbation the more she looked for. One day, Emma realized that enough was plenty. She realized she couldn't keep counting on Matt to feel safe. She turned inside out, building her confidence. She began attending to herself in ways she had neglected. She registered in a neighboring painting class, something she had always wanted to do but had been too nervous to do. Not to appear a particular way, she started frequently going to the gym to feel powerful and healthy. Above all, she stopped looking on Matt for constant solace, though little. The shift was rather noticeable. Emma carried about her business differently. She stopped waiting on Matt to convince her she was enough. She smiled more, entered a room with her head held high, and realized she was enough. She knew she was. She grew at ease in her own flesh, and that ease showed itself. The interesting thing is that Matt began to move back toward Emma once more as Emma grew more confident. Her attitude had altered, even if he couldn't quite pinpoint it. She was no more the always insecure, timid person seeking acceptance all the time. She valued herself, and confidence had magnetic power. It improved her appeal to Matt as well as to those around her. Confidence is magnetic. So it is the sixth proof. Those that feel safe with you will naturally gravitate toward you and avoid depending on external validation. They seem to share your confidence and wish to be part of that energy. Still, the Stoic fact is that this assurance comes from inside rather than from without. It's about realizing you need no one else to persuade. You're enough, and learning to value yourself. Emma's story teaches us that if you stop looking to the outside and start growing it from inside, you will seem more appealing, in addition to start feeling more peace and contentment. 7. The value of independence. Has anyone you know seemed to have their life together and not depend on others for their direction or happiness? Independence appeals greatly. It's like seeing a confident, self-sufficient performer who is genuinely in their element. Here's why. Once you become independent, you could be irresistible. Allow me to introduce Alex. Alex was seeing Jordan, the central focus of his life. Deeply loved Jordan, he wanted to see him content. To suit Jordan, Alex would adjust his calendar, call off his obligations, and even put his own needs last. A symbol of love, he believed, was being present and giving Jordan top attention over all else. But Alex observed with time a change. Jordan seemed to be less animated and more detached. The flame seemed to fade as a passionate love began to feel like choreography. One day Alex realized he wanted things different. He began to recognize he had been postponing his own life, as he had been losing sight of his own hobbies and interests. Separated from the marriage, he withdrew to rediscover himself. He started rock climbing, picked up painting again, and even started planning a solo trip. He had always wanted hobbies he had put off. Alex came to embrace his independence, and something interesting happened. His energy changed. He stopped never-endingly asking Jordan for permission or attention. He was following his own tastes and enjoying his own company. When he spent time with Jordan, his motivations were more from a real want and excitement than from a necessity or obligation. Jordan began to sense this transformation. Jordan felt himself drawn back in more the more Alex focused on his own interests and gratification. Alex was especially more intriguing as he wasn't overly reliant on him. Jordan realized he had lost the lively, confident man Alex had developed. Alex's freedom became to him a strength rather than a deficit, and he began to respect her independence. One's need of independence. When you enjoy your own life and are self-sufficient, happy. Under a Stoic perspective, independence is about appreciating your own value and resisting depending on others for acceptance or gratification. Alex's story shows that when you lead a life that provides you enjoyment, and when you grow personally on your own, You start to look fairly attractive to others. Here the lesson is quite clear. Embrace your independence. Pursue your own interest, design your own happiness, and let your own self-sufficiency draw attention. Once you discover satisfaction on your own, you draw actual relationships and effective teams. 8. The role of self-respect. Have you ever noticed how naturally attractive people who value themselves draw others? It's like meeting someone that values their worth and won't settle for less. People naturally find self-respect appealing. It's a powerful draw for others in. Let me use a story to relate this. Now presenting Mia. Mia was seeing Chris, and first everything seemed perfect. Chris was polite, observant, and they had wonderful time together. But Mia began to uncover subtle signs Chris neglected her over time. He would often dismiss her, call off last-minute plans, and make offhand comments undermining her self-esteem. Mia continued wishing that despite these challenges things would get better. She put up with his conduct since she wanted the relationship to last. One day Mia got her brain clear. She realized she was losing sight of her own value by allowing actions contradictory with her values. She promised herself to set boundaries and fight for her rights. She told Chris she would not tolerate being treated as an afterthought that she expected. Respect and thought in the marriage. Chris first found himself taken aback. He wasn't used to Mia boldly speaking for herself, but Mia's new stance was revolutionary. Her self-respect refused to compromise and included appreciating her own worth, transcending simple boundary setting. She started to follow her own interests, give her demands first attention, and reject behavior that undermined her self-esteem. Mia's respect of herself grew in line with something truly remarkable. Chris started to see her from another angle. He was no more the center of her life, and this change in dynamic caused him to rethink how he handled her. He began trying to honor her limits, improve his communication, and express gratitude. The connection started to change from one of unbalance to one of mutual respect and appreciation. The part self-respect plays: you tell others you deserve respect. When you value yourself and create reasonable limits, this self-respect turns into a strong tool that draws individuals who share your ideals and are ready to treat you with the respect you so merit. Within the framework of Stoicism, foster better, more polite relationships when you firmly uphold your self-respect. The lesson here is really strong. Never sacrifice your own dignity for anyone. Establish limits, value yourself, and see how it changes your life and relationships. People will be drawn to your strength and respect you in return. When you hold yourself in great respect. 9. The impact of emotional distance. Has somebody ever seemed more interested in you when you were less available? Things that seem out of reach have a magnetic attraction. People's impressions of us can surprisingly change with emotional distance. To help you see this, let me relate a narrative about Sarah and Mike. Years of friendship had seen Sarah grow in affections for Mike over time. She was always there, always willing to help, and always putting his needs first. She would go out of her way to show him how much she cared. Mike first valued Sarah's consideration and generosity, but over time he started to take her presence for granted. He knew she was always there, hence he had little need to try. Sarah came to see one day that her always availability was not serving her well. It seemed to be working the opposite way, not making her more appealing. She was always there, ready to drop everything for Mike, but he seemed to value her less than she would have. She decided to take a different tack. Sarah began to set some emotional space. She started giving her own wants and interests top priority. She concentrated on her interests, hung out with other friends, and created arrangements excluding Mike instead of being always accessible. She was merely learning to balance her own life. She was not acting in a nasty or distant manner. Though small, Sarah's actions changed in importance. Mike saw as she started to back off and turn her attention inside. Their relationship changed, and he began to miss her presence. The emotional distance produced a place in which he could consider his value of her. Realizing he had taken her for granted, he began trying more to spend quality time with her, therefore appreciating her company more thoroughly. Proof number 9, the effect of emotional distance. Making some room in relationships could help you to be more appealing. The distance lets people value what they could have taken for granted, and breaks the pattern of perpetual availability, therefore enabling others to see your worth. Within the framework of Stoicism, emotional detachment is about realizing your own value and not allowing continuous affirmation from others to define your self-worth. It's about striking equilibrium and not allowing the demands or expectations of others control you. The lesson here is obvious. If it means respecting your personal needs, don't hesitate to establish some emotional distance. When you do, folks could start to view you differently and value you far more. So there you have it, 9 proofs that they only want you when you no longer want them, all through the lens of women's stoicism. I hope this story of Emma resonated with you, because it's a story that reflects a deep truth about relationships, attraction, and the power of self-worth. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button. Your support means everything and helps this community grow.